You're not going to believe what I'm about to do. I am going to raise the issue that is tearing the Jewish people apart these days, especially the people living in Israel. And I am going to provide an answer from a sermon I delivered in 2008. The issue is the issue of the hostages and what Israel should do. You know what the conflict is all about. The issue of making a deal with Hamas has all sorts of serious risks. There's a danger in releasing terrorists, some of whom are certain to kill again. And then the idea of withdrawing from the Gaza-Egypt border just opens Israel up to facing more smuggling of arms into the hands of Hamas. At the same time, those protesting against the government also have a good argument to be made. After all, the heads of all the army IDFs and defense secretary are in favor of the deal. And they're our hostages, our children. Isn't it worth any deal to get them back? So what's the answer? I gave the answer in 2008. And I'm going to read you that sermon. Because unfortunately, sometimes the more things change, the more they remain the same. So here we go. This is what I wrote in 2008. Did Israel do the right thing this summer when it traded the murderer Samir Kuntar for what turned out to be the bodies of two Israeli soldiers held hostage, Ehud Goldwasser or Eldad Regev? Let me explain what was involved in this swap. Samir Kuntar, in 1979, did one of the worst terrorist acts in Israel's history. He killed an Israeli policeman, shooting and killing a father in front of his 4-year-old daughter, then killing the child by smashing her head against a rock with the butt of his rifle. While this was taking place, Mrs. Haran hid with her 2-year-old baby, and in stifling the baby's cries, accidentally smothered the baby to death. Now let's shift the scene. In 2006, Hezbollah crossed the Israeli border with Lebanon, killed several soldiers, and took Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev hostage. No one knew if they were dead or alive. And after massive negotiations, Israel agreed to swap Kantar, who continued to say that he would do more of the same in return for Regev and Goldwasser, who, as many had suspected, were dead. And so I asked in 2008, same question we're asking today. Did Israel do the right thing? And then I said this. The reason I asked the question is because it's a question that doesn't have a correct answer. On most any other issue regarding Israel, my opinion is affected by the opinions of others whose perspectives I respect. But in this case, people whose opinions I respect disagreed, and not a little, but a lot. Within 48 hours of the swap, I saw emails from 2 American Jews who now live in Israel, whose opinions I always read and take to heart. Coincidentally, we had both of them as speakers here at Beth Tefillah some time back. Naomi Reagan is a well-known author, and Daniel Gordis is one of our people's brightest minds. Well, of course, he's a product of the Beth Military School. So listen to what Naomi Reagan wrote back then. I am deeply ashamed to be an Israeli today, and I'm not very proud of being a Jew either if this is how a Jewish country behaves. To lead the world in ever more despicable acts of appeasement is nothing to be proud of. The torch we always carried, the light unto the nations, has been blown out by hot air of our politicians. Powerful words against the deal. But listen to what Daniel Gordis wrote. Just as powerful. What we did this week is that we did right by the families who paid the price. We showed that at the end of the day, it is not only strategic calculus that matters in this country. There will always be other ways to get our deterrent edge back. But in the meantime, we showed ourselves once again that this country is about soul. They won and we lost. They celebrated and we buried. They cheered and we wept. And I'd rather be one of us any day. Unbelievable how two American Jews who had such love for Israel that they moved there could view this from such a different lens. What leads to such opposite perspectives? Let me give you one possibility. One possibility reflected in the verse in this week's Torah portion, seemingly a simple verse that's telling us a very important law and lesson. Our Torah portion contained many important biblical commandments. One of the laws was, the father shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. The law seems to be a clear statement that parents are not to be held responsible for the actions of their children, and children are not to be held responsible for the actions of the parents. The sages in the Talmud argued that this concept is already stated in the Torah in other ways. Certainly something else is involved here. And the sages go on to say that from here we learn a very important biblical lesson. A father is not to be put to death by the testimony of his son, and a son is not to be put to death by the testimony of his father. It's the principle of karov pasul le'edut. A relative cannot testify against another relative. A relative's testimony cannot be accepted because they're too close to the people involved. Their testimony will have a bias. And the Talmud goes on to say that amongst the relatives who can't testify about each other, this includes a brother, a father's brother, a mother's brother, a sister's brother, the husbands of one's maternal or paternal aunt, a stepfather, a father-in-law, a brother-in-law, a whole list of those who are ineligible because of potential bias. What we see here is that Jewish law is very cognizant of the fact that people are inclined to view things from their own perspective, that we all have personal biases in the way we look at things. And the closer we get, the more biased we are. In the case of the hostage swap, this bias was clearly reflected during what is known as the First Lebanon War, when Geula Cohen, who was a right-wing hardline member of Knesset, was asked what she would do if her son, who was a paratrooper in the war, was taken prisoner. Her reply was, "As a mother, I would be outside Prime Minister's office with a megaphone 24 hours a day, calling on the government to do everything it took to obtain his release. But as a Knesset member, I would sit inside the Prime Minister's office and tell him not to listen to the people outside." She understood that how she would view a hostage swap would depend on whether she was viewing from a perspective of a member of the Knesset or from the perspective of a mother. She's not alone. Rarely are we able to judge simply on the basis of the facts. For how we view the facts is oftentimes affected by our own personal views and biases. Naomi Reagan had long argued against concessions to the Palestinians, seeing little hope for peace. And so the hostage swap went against everything she believed. At the same time, Daniel Gordis had always had a more moderate view of the Palestinian conflict and always held out hope for peace. And so he viewed the hostage swap from a more moderate perspective. That's what I said in 2008. And nothing seems to have changed. So who's right? It depends on every person's own perspective. Let's hope that in the long run, Israel will prove to be right. Our hostages will be home and will be able to have a new year that will be Shana Tova Umetuka, good and sweet from every perspective.
Come on.